It's a saying in the movie business. Tell me a fact and I'll learn. Tell me the truth and I'll believe. But tell me a story and it will live in my heart forever. Well, the story of Marlon Briscoe is one that should never be forgotten. 40 years ago, as a rookie with the Denver Broncos, Marlon Briscoe became the first African-American quarterback to start a modern professional football game. Marlon was a pioneer. He was a trailblazer. But that trail was filled with many obstacles, both professional and personal. And that's what makes his story meaningful and worth telling. Although Briscoe set a rookie record for quarterbacks with 14 touchdowns, the exciting, elusive player they nicknamed the Magician had to deal with pro football's inherent prejudice against black quarterbacks. And despite his record-setting rookie season, Briscoe never started another game at quarterback. He went on to become a wide receiver and earned 2 Super Bowl rings with the Dolphins, but then descended into drug addiction and despair. Marlon's eventual comeback was as dramatic as any down-to-the-wire football game, and his story is one of the most inspirational in NFL history.
There are moments in history the record books refuse to touch, stories buried deep, not because they lacked greatness, but because they made the wrong people squirm. In the fall of 1968, the Denver Broncos were falling apart, a mess on the field, fans losing hope, and quarterbacks dropping like flies. Then out of nowhere came a young man from Omaha, calm under fire, lightning fast, and fearless to the core, Marlon Briscoe. The name that made the establishment nervous. He was everything the league swore a black man couldn't be. Smooth under pressure, strategic like a chess master, and lethal with both his arm and his brain. They called him the Magician, and every Sunday, he turned chaos into art. He made defenders vanish, pulled touchdowns out of thin air, and brought Denver to life. But just when he proved he could win, when the city finally believed, the league reminded him what kind of game he was really playing. He wasn't benched for bad passes, and he wasn't cut for breaking rules. He was erased for breaking a boundary they didn't want crossed, for showing the world that a black man could lead a team and command respect. This is the story of the first black starting quarterback in modern pro football, the man who showed the NFL its future before they tried to bury it, before the silence, before the denial, before they rewrote his legacy. In that hot summer of 1968, Marlon Briscoe showed up to Broncos camp as a nobody, a 14th. He was smooth. Too smooth for their comfort, confident, poised, and ice cold under pressure, like he'd been there his whole life. At Omaha, Marlon Briscoe wasn't just good, he was unstoppable. Over 4,400 yards and 52 touchdowns proved it. He wasn't just fast, he was calculated, reading defenses before the ball even moved. His teammates called him the Magician because he could turn chaos into gold. He'd twist out of sacks, slip through hands like smoke, and still launch perfect lasers downfield.
I moved out to California. I wasn't a big city kid, and I didn't really realize the pitfalls of making bad choices in terms of friends and where you hang out. And, I was always conscientious as a player, getting in shape, staying in shape, and, investing my money and all that stuff. So I did that. But when I got to LA, I kind of let my guard down. All of a sudden, I didn't have to get in shape. I didn't have to be disciplined. I could let my guard down in terms of partying a little bit, more than I used to. And so, at first, we were having fun. I was having fun. But that fun turned into something else, it turned into a bitter addiction that I never thought would take me out like that.
That fall, Denver was collapsing. Quarterbacks injured, playbook a mess, fans furious, the whole city ready to give up. Out of desperation, the coach's chance to prove himself. The crowd didn't know what to expect, half curious, half doubtful, as the first black quarterback in modern NFL history took the field. And then, touchdown, just like that. He made it look too easy. The next week he started, and Denver won. Then they won again. Each game was a magic trick no one could explain. How could this rookie, this long shot, this outsider, flip losing into winning overnight? The city fell in love instantly. Newspapers plastered the magician across headlines in bold print, calling him Denver's miracle. He was calm in the pocket, ending you on the move, and impossible to stop. For a shining moment, it felt like history was rewriting itself right there under the stadium lights. But behind closed doors, the men in charge weren't smiling. They didn't see magic. They saw a threat. Because if Marlon Briscoe could lead a team, what else could he lead? What else could he change? And what would that mean for the image the NFL had spent decades protecting? At first, Denver adored him. The fans, the press, the locker room. Everyone felt the spark he brought. But power never likes being challenged, and the higher-ups were already plotting how to dim that light. Grasping for every breath of his dream, Marlon Briscoe turned broken plays into miracles. His legs danced through chaos, and his passes sliced through defenses that never even saw him coming. Every victory felt like more than just a win. It was rebellion in motion. The whole city was hypnotized by the magician. But behind those stadium cheers, the mood inside the Broncos' offices was ice cold. The idea of a black man leading a huddle in 1968, barking orders, calling plays, commanding white teammates, made some people in power tremble. They couldn't say it out loud, but their Marlon Briscoe had shattered records, more touchdown passes than any rookie in Denver history. He didn't just prove he could play, he proved he could lead. But instead of celebrating him, the Broncos signed not one, but two new white quarterbacks. No calls, no meetings, no explanation, just quiet betrayal. Marlon showed up to training camp ready for battle, still believing in fairness, still thinking hard work spoke louder than politics. But when he walked into the locker room, his nameplate was gone. His locker, reassigned, his playbook, taken. And on the roster sheet under quarterback, his name had vanished like it never existed. Just like that, it was over.
They had like 8 quarterbacks at camp. And you get your long range, short range, and medium range throws. So they would get 10, and I was always one on the tail end, and I would not get 10 throws. I knew it wasn't going to be a level playing field, but nevertheless, I prepared myself for that, both physically and mentally, and made sure that all of the throws that I did get, that, I did the best that I could do.
The first black starting quarterback in modern pro football had been erased from his own story. He wasn't cut for throwing interceptions. He was cut for throwing too well. For making history they weren't ready to accept. Marlon thought his talent would protect him, that another team would see the truth on film and call him up. That's how the NFL was supposed to work. But no one called. The phone stayed silent. The league that cheered his magic he packed his bags and started calling around the league himself, trying to keep his dream alive. But every conversation ended the same way. Polite lies and closed doors. Coaches told him, "We're full this season," or "Our playbook's too complicated." Some didn't even bother dressing it up. One finally said what the rest were thinking, "We're not ready for that kind of attention." Translation, we're not ready for a black man leading white men. Weeks turned into months and disbelief started creeping in. How could someone who made history be treated like a ghost? His highlight reels vanished from TV archives as if the tapes had been scrubbed clean. Newspapers stopped printing his name. It was like Denver's magician had been made to disappear for real. And this time, there was no comeback play left to pull. Then came a call from Buffalo, but it wasn't the call he'd been waiting for. They didn't want a quarterback. They wanted a wide receiver. Any position was fine, as long as it didn't come with power. No leadership, no decision-making, no control. Still, because Marlon loved the game more than his pride, he said yes. And what did he do? He excelled. He flipped the script again. Became a Pro Bowl wideout, catching touchdowns instead of throwing them. He built a second life out of the ashes of his first, but deep down, he knew the truth. He hadn't been beaten by competition. He'd been buried by a system terrified of what he represented. The NFL didn't just bench him, it banished him. Years passed, but Marlon Briscoe's shadow never left the field. The league tried to erase him, but the game itself refused to forget. Every time a new black quarterback showed up at training camp, the same whispers crept back in. Can he read defenses? Can he lead men? The same tired code words they once used to erase Briscoe. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, the NFL wore its best polite smile in public, all about equality and progress. But behind closed doors, the same quiet racism lingered like a locked gate. The message stayed clear. They still weren't ready for what Marlon Briscoe had already proven possible. For years after Marlon Briscoe, the same pattern kept playing out. Teams would draft black quarterbacks and immediately switch them to wide receiver or defensive back before they ever threw a single pass. They called it athletic versatility, but everyone knew what it really meant. We don't want you under center. It was the league's quiet way of keeping control while pretending to celebrate diversity.
I'm 9 or 10 years old. This bully used to chase me home. And my mother got tired of this bully chasing me home, so she told my cousin Bob about the situation. So he came by the house, and he said, I'm gonna come back over here tomorrow, and when I leave, you're never going to run from anybody again. So he brought over this box full of footballs and basketballs and baseballs, and they were all dusted with old equipment. And one by one, he taught me how to play each one of those sports, including boxing.
Then, in 1988, Doug Williams smashed through that wall, winning the Super Bowl for Washington and becoming the first black quarterback to lift the Lombardi Trophy. But even in that historic moment, he carried the ghost of Marlon Briscoe with him. Years later, Williams would say it plain, Marlon was the one who did it first, and he paid the price for it. Marlon himself never bragged, never lashed out. He stayed humble. Maybe too humble. The same game that betrayed him still lived in his heart. But life after football wasn't kind. He battled addiction, lost everything, and had to rebuild himself piece by piece. Through it all, he never stopped carrying that quiet wound, the kind only pioneers understand, the kind that comes from opening a door others get to walk through while you get pushed out. Then, slowly, history began to come back around. As the NFL started finally celebrating black quarterbacks, the Mahomes, the Jacksons, the Hurts, Marlon's name started whispering its way back into the light. Reporters dug up the old grainy 1968 footage. That young man in orange and blue rolling right, dodging tacklers, and firing a perfect strike into the end zone. The crowd exploding. The legend of the magician flickered back to life once more. He begun admitting but he was so much more than that. He was proof that talent can shake power to its core. Marlon didn't just play the game, he changed it. He stood in that huddle and showed the world that intelligence, grace, and leadership don't come in one color. They tried to erase him, but legends like Marlon Briscoe never stay buried. Because every time a black quarterback steps under center and calls a play, somewhere in the echoes of the crowd, the magician smiles again. And every time a black quarterback commands the field today, calling plays, owning the spotlight, Marlon Briscoe lives again. For decades, his name was treated like a whisper, a rumor traded in barbershops, locker rooms, and family cookouts, but never spoken out loud by the league that buried him. The NFL kept moving forward, building billion-dollar empires on the backs of players who didn't even know whose shoulders they were standing on. But truth has a way of fighting its way back into the light and turning busted plays into art. And in each of them, in the confidence, the poise, the creativity, there was a piece of Marlon Briscoe. The calm under pressure, the vision that saw beyond the playbook, the defiance that refused to fit in a box. The future he showed the world back in 1968 had finally arrived, even if most still didn't know his name. Then came the documentaries, the deep dives, the late-night retrospectives. Reporters started asking the question that hung in the air for decades. How could the first black starting quarterback in modern pro football vanish from history for so long? Old coaches fumbled their words. Executives claimed they didn't remember. But everyone knew the silence wasn't an accident. It was strategy. The league had rewritten its own story, and Briscoe didn't fit the version they wanted to sell. When the NFL finally invited Marlon to official events later in life, he showed up with quiet dignity, no grudges, no speeches dripping with bitterness. He didn't need to demand justice. His presence was justice. Just standing there, he exposed decades of denial without saying for his name. The same league that once shut him out of quarterback meetings now calls him a pioneer.
It's not only about drugs, too. It's about being anybody that you want to be, not letting somebody tell you what you can or cannot do. So there are a lot of messages out there, that I've experienced. I tell them that, even though you do positive things, you do things that merit certain opportunities. Sometimes those opportunities are denied, but you can never give up. You got to be persistent in life and face these challenges. And even when things don't go right, you got to stand up to those challenges and make them. And hopefully they'll turn around in your favor.
The irony burns, but the truth stands taller. They couldn't bury the magician forever. And yet, even with all the tributes and awards, the reckoning still isn't finished. Because every time a black quarterback gets criticized for being too flashy, too emotional, or not a real leader, you can still hear the faint echo of what Marlon Briscoe faced in 1968. His struggle lives in those moments, reminding the world that progress isn't about pretending the past never happened. It's about finally admitting it did. You can still hear the magician's ghost in every doubt, every backhanded compliment, every coded phrase that questions a black quarterback's leadership. Because Marlon Briscoe, that's real courage. But what the league tried to bury, time refused to forget. His quiet defiance didn't fade, it multiplied. It lives in every play where courage meets control, in every pass that breaks stereotypes wide open. Every time a young black quarterback steps under those blinding lights and commands the huddle with confidence, that's Marlon Briscoe's spirit right there, living through them. He was erased from the books once, but not anymore. Now his name stands tall, untouchable, not in the hands of gatekeepers or the spin of history, but in truth, in legacy, and in the hearts of everyone who finally knows who the magician really was. He turned silence into legend, and that legend will never fade. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and check out the next one showing on your screen. See you in the next one.